Okay, let's dive in. I mean, just imagine for a second growing up completely, well, off the grid, remote mountain.
Right.
No birth certificate, never setting foot in a school, never seeing a doctor. Your whole world is just survivalism and hard labor.
It sounds like fiction, doesn't it? But it's absolutely the true start of the story we're looking at today.
And that story is Tara Westover's memoir, Educated.
Such a powerful book. It really follows her journey from this extremely isolated childhood in Idaho, like you said, zero formal schooling,
Yeah.
all the way to somehow getting a PhD from Cambridge University. It's just an incredible look at the personal cost, the transformation involved in seeking knowledge, finding your own way.
So our goal here is to really pull out the key insights from the book for you. We'll explore what life was actually like on Bucks Peak, what sparked her desire to learn in the first place, the huge challenges, the kind of mind-blowing revelation she had when she finally hit the academic world.
Right, the culture shock.
Exactly. And then finally, what did this education really cost her? And what did it all mean in the end?
Yeah, and to really get it, you have to start with Bucks Peak, Idaho. This place, this environment. It was totally shaped by her family's fundamentalist beliefs. Very anti-government, anti-modern medicine.
The book has these really specific details, doesn't it? Like her dad clearing out the fridge, worried about milk, or storing huge amounts of honey for, like, the end times.
Exactly. Driven by these intense fears, Y2K was a big one, the Millennium Bug fear.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And he'd often reference things like the Ruby Ridge incident, the Weaver family standoff, as proof the government couldn't be trusted.
And it wasn't just stocking supplies, was it? It was a wholesale rejection of, well, everything mainstream, especially school.
Definitely. The kids were kept home. Tara mentions her mother initially framed it as providing a better education.
Right.
But pretty soon it was just dominated by her father's conviction.
Yeah.
He thought public school was basically a government plot. He said he'd rather surrender my kids to the devil himself. So the book says her mother kind of lost that argument, and the kids, mostly the boys, but Tara too at times, just got funneled into working in the family junkyard.
And that junkyard work sounds terrifyingly dangerous. What were some of the incidents that really stood out?
Oh, it's rough reading. Tara herself falls from a massive scrap bin at one point. Her brother Luke gets this horrific burn on his leg.
And they treated it at home?
Entirely at home, with herbal remedies their mother prepared. Same with her other brother, Sean, who had multiple serious accidents, including a fall from a pallet that caused a really bad head injury.
Just treated with herbs.
Well, herbs and their mother's other skills. She became a midwife, used muscle testing, energy work. That was their healthcare system, even for things that clearly needed, a hospital.
That level of disconnect is just hard to grasp. And the family dynamics sound just as intense. There's that constant push and pull about education, right, between the parents.
Absolutely. Her father is portrayed as, well, charismatic, but also really volatile, paranoid sometimes, seeing conspiracies like the Illuminati everywhere.
Her mother develops this whole identity around her healing practices. And then the siblings, it's complicated. One brother, Tyler, somehow manages to leave for college.
Against the grain.
Totally.
Yeah.
While another, Sean, becomes increasingly volatile, even violent, which the family seemed to struggle to acknowledge or even justified.
Yeah, and even the grandma who lived nearby, grandma down the hill, she was worried about them not being in school, but Dad just shut that down.
Right. So given all that, this incredibly restrictive environment, how on earth does Tara even start thinking about education? What lit that spark?
It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? But the book points to her brother Tyler as a major influence.
The one who left.
Yeah. He quietly resisted their dad's anti-college stance. Dad thought college was basically joining the Illuminati, even worried they'd infiltrated the church at BYU, which is where Tyler went.
Wow.
But Tyler just kept studying, learning trigonometry secretly. And eventually, he directly encouraged Tara. He told her, basically, you could study music. Dad might even be okay with that, sort of. That little nudge. Plus, didn't their mother get, like, an early version of AOL?
Yeah, a trial version.
Yeah.
And Tyler showed Tara the BYU website. Seeing those pictures, that different world.
Yeah.
That seemed to be a real turning point for her.
Okay, but going from seeing a website to actually getting into college when you've never been to school, that's a huge leap.
Monumental. She had to teach herself everything for the ACT, the college entrance exam. She talks about seeing algebra for the first time and being completely lost. Like, where are the numbers?
I can only imagine.
Her mom tried to help, but couldn't really explain it. She ended up having to rely on Tyler again.
So she's teaching herself basic math, basically.
Hmm.
And then there's the whole administrative side, getting official documents.
Right. That was a huge deal. Applying meant defying her father's core anti-government principles. She had to get a birth certificate. It was called a delayed certificate of birth, which needed a statement from her grandma.
Going against everything she'd been taught about avoiding the system.
Totally. And then taking the ACT itself, she writes about just the physical act of sitting at a desk for 4 hours being totally alien. She didn't even know how to fill in the little bubbles on the answer sheet.
Incredible.
But somehow she got a score. High enough for DYU. And her dad's reaction when she told him.
What did he say?
Basically, time he moved out.
Yeah.
Just instant confirmation of the gap opening up between them. It's also interesting the book mentions a bishop later encouraged her to go back to school after she'd left for a bit. So support from outside the family was also key.
So she gets in, makes this unbelievable leap, and lands at BYU. What was that like, stepping into that world?
Profound culture shock. She described the campus looking like something from a happy movie. But then she starts encountering basic history, things everyone else knew that she'd never heard of.
Like what?
The Holocaust was a big one. She describes reading about it in the library for hours, just reeling from the shock of learning about my own ignorance. The Civil Rights Movement, too. She initially thought the date, 1963, must be a typo.
Because it didn't fit with what she'd learned.
Exactly. It clashed completely with her father's narratives about history, which she'd sometimes heard echoed even in unexpected places, though professors like Dr. Kimball were teaching standard history.
And it wasn't just academic stuff, right? It was social things, too, even with people who shared her Mormon faith.
Oh, absolutely. How her roommates dressed, what they did on Sundays. It highlighted this immensity of the gap, as she put it, between her family's very specific practices and how others lived their faith.
That must have been incredibly isolating. And academically, she still had major hurdles.
Big time. Algebra was still a nightmare. She almost lost her scholarship, failed a midterm. The stress was immense. She developed stomach ulcers, had a toe injury she didn't want to get medical help for initially.
How did she pull through? How did she catch up?
Sheer grit, really.
Mm-hmm.
But also, crucially, accepting help. Friends shared notes, studied with her, and she made a really important shift. She moved away from music, which Tyler suggested.
The safer option.
Right, and leaned into history and politics, subjects she found genuinely fascinating that helped her make sense of everything. She started really learning how to learn flashcards, lectures, the whole academic process.
But learning all this new stuff, seeing the world differently, that must have created huge internal conflict. Loyalty to family versus this new reality.
Definitely. She felt completely torn. She writes about feeling there was no foothold in between, like she had to choose, stand with my family or with the Gentiles, meaning everyone outside their world.
And that ties into identity, right? Feeling like you don't quite fit anywhere.
Exactly. Later, at Cambridge, she talks about feeling like an impersonation, or that her interest in things like politics wasn't compatible with the idea of womanhood she grew up with.
And it's through education, through getting this new perspective and language, that she starts to really understand and name the abuse she experienced, particularly from Sean.
Yes. The book is very frank about that. The name-calling, the physical violence, that terrifying incident with the knife. But recognizing it as abuse was complicated because the family response was often denial or justifying it. Her mother especially struggled, at one point telling Tara the memories were false, impossible.
So pursuing this education, this self-discovery, it came at a steep price, personally.
A huge price. The book details this really painful widening gap between Tara and her family, especially as she tried to address the abuse and their different versions of reality.
Which eventually led to them disowning her.
Heartbreakingly, yes. Her father and mother cut ties. It split the family. She talks about the 3 who had left the mountain and the 4 who had stayed.
And she mentions the economic ties, right? How some siblings depended on the parents' business.
Yeah, which made it incredibly hard for them to support her or even acknowledge her perspective. It culminated in this awful moment in the Sacred Grove, a place important to their faith, where her father basically accused her of being possessed, taken by Lucifer.
Wow. Just devastating. And education also pushed her to confront these really deep questions about memory and truth, didn't it?
Absolutely. She had to question everything she'd been taught, the reliability of her own memories, other people's memories. She notes there were conflicting stories about things like Sean's fall.
So it wasn't just learning history, it was learning how to sift through her own history.
Exactly. And that process, writing journals, eventually getting counseling, was all tied up with building her own identity separate from the mountains, separate from her family's definitions.
Which really brings us to the core meaning of education in the book. It's not just the degrees, BYU, Harvard, Cambridge, PhD.
Right. Impressive as those are.
It's about gaining a whole new way of seeing, understanding the world, understanding herself. She calls it self-creation, actually defining her own life, the distance she travels, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. It's just staggering.
It really is. Tara Westover's journey from that mountain to Cambridge is just extraordinary. Such resilience, such intellect.
And her story really powerfully shows how knowledge can transform you, not just academics, but changing how you see everything, the world, yourself, your place in it.
Yeah, and it highlights the incredible courage it takes to chase that, especially when it means challenging everything you know, facing down huge obstacles, and even losing family.
Absolutely. The cost was immense.
So maybe here's a final thought, something to chew on from this deep dive into Educated. Think about your own learning journey, formal or informal. How has what you've learned challenged you or maybe reinforced who you think you are? Tara's story really pushes us to ask, what does belonging mean? And how do we make sense of our lives when we're dealing with conflicting histories, not just big world history, but the histories within our own families, our own pasts?